Dr. Habbu to also share his wealth of knowledge on the biodegradability aspect. So today he is going to discuss the biodegradability in polymeric materials, and he will enlighten us on this critical topic. So students and academicians, faculty members of textile as well as the polymer division, and also some our friends from industry have joined today. So Habu sir,
Uh,
if possible, can you
yes.
please quickly recap some of the important points of earlier, because some new participants have joined. So if it is possible, if it is convenient to you, just highlights of the earlier
Yes,
sessions.
sure, I will do that. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. What we started this as a simple request from ICT, and whether I could, talk about sustainability of polymeric materials. And since those of you who know, ICT deals with 7 branches of technology, 2 of which the original branch of ICT is textiles and chemical engineering. That is how ICT, then you called UDCT, started. And then, of course, we had other branches adding on to that, such as pharmaceuticals, foods, plastics, dyestuffs, etc. So in current world, the polymeric materials such as textiles and plastics, although taught separately, uh, my idea was to look at them colored together because both of them are polymeric materials. And looking at them in silos only jeopardizes any innovation or any kind of path-breaking research. So this was an, of course, this cannot be one reason, one way of bringing about that unification. But still, if we are able to demonstrate how many of the current topics interface with both the departments, that would be a good beginning. We decided to pick up on sustainability because that's the talk of the town these days, and quite rightly so, because it deals with something called climate change. So I started with a kind of hazy idea framework, which I had discussions with the ICT staff who were so patient with me to allow me to have my pace, because this couldn't be structured, in a very perfect manner beforehand, because we had to see what kind of topics get developed, what kind of interest gets generated. So in the first lecture, and that is how we stretched it over what earlier was planned to be 4 or 5 lectures, we stretched it to 7 lectures. The idea being we didn't want it to be in the kind of conference thing where within 25 minutes you finish off a topic. You just go slide after slide and then you don't know whether the audience has understood it or not. Here, so it was more of a tutorial kind of thing. So in talk 1, we discussed about climate change and what exactly is happening, what are the United Nations agencies, how the world is responding, how different countries are responding, how different sectors of existence are responsible for what fraction of the climate change, etc. We then discussed how climate change telescopes into sustainability, what is the meaning of sustainability. And then we also said that how this fits into circular economy. So one telescopes into the other. And then we said, how do all these concepts, which are rightly with a rage, because come November, there is going to be COP26 to be held in Scotland. And in the backdrop of it, what is the manufacturing sector, particularly to textiles and plastics, how are they related with all these discussions? So we saw that. We then saw in the next lecture, I will not tell you what happened in which lecture, but I will just tell you the flow of thoughts that happened. Then we discussed polymeric materials and textiles and how in some cases there are interlinks quite strong, polyester being one of the greatest examples, which provides the umbilical cord between polymeric materials and textiles. How all these began by the enunciation of the concept of polymer by Professor Staudinger in July 1920, about 101 years ago. And then we saw that as we speak, we celebrated the 80 years of polyester fibers, and that became a reason for also linking plastics and textiles together. We saw the kind of unique features in the in the various materials like metals, glass, or leather, or any other materials. The unique feature of plastics is that we saw how their morphology, molecular weight can be, how the molecular weight and the processing conditions can also linked up with rheology can influence the final morphology in the polymer. Although you begin with the same chemistry, you could end up with a diverse range of properties. That's the kind of unique features of polymers. We then said that that is precisely because of the advantage of these materials, whether it is plastics or synthetic textiles, they have come in our lives in such a large scale with such a speed. Now, in doing so, they have served us well. They have served the humankind quite well. But what has happened is, as a probably unplanned and unforeseen consequences, that because of their huge production, they have ended up becoming that much severe problem to be solved after their use. So we talked about the huge landfills and the piles of garbage that we see, both of plastics and textiles. And we then decided how to handle these problems. And therefore, we delved into concepts of, objective techniques such as life cycle assessment and then Higgs index for textiles, how quantitative techniques are being developed in these worlds. And we also, as we went along all the time, reminded ourselves how these are the new areas of research, new areas of teaching, new areas of employment, new areas of innovation, which is what all the attendees should be triggered. That in addition to the conventional areas of pursuit after your degrees and everything, instead of hunting for jobs in the same big companies, here are the new avenues that we can look at. And because these topics are not discussed in the details that they ought to, but that is precisely the reason where the attendees of these talks could benefit from. So we said that the eco footprint needs to be understood. Eco footprint is not just the litter that we see or the waste that we see. Eco footprint is a broad term which takes into account the energy and raw material inputs and the power inputs that go into the making of the material, plus at every stage in the manufacturing chain, what happens due to transportation. So what are the inputs and what are the outputs, such as effluents, emissions, and during the processes and during the transportation from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. And we saw the various steps in the manufacturing chain of plastics and textiles. We then decided that the common slogans that are presently are the 5 R's, that is recycle, reduce, reuse, repurpose, redesign, so many things. And we said we first talked about recycle because that is something which is commonly heard and talked and probably understood. So we dived deep into the recycling. We saw the regulatory framework of how recycling can be done. What are the different types of recycling, such as mechanical, chemical recycling. And then subsequently, we looked at the other R's, such as reduce, reuse, repair and reuse, and all these things, how they are applicable and how actually they are being practiced by various companies and brands in various countries and continents. At each of the stage, we looked at the latest data as recent as last week's data. So we just looked at all the data, which is not older than 3 months. So that is how recently we looked at the material, in the hope to convince that the entire world, including the corporates and the governments, are seized with the matter and they are taking serious efforts, and India should not be left far behind. We then talked about, the other the important factor is that this problem is such a massive problem that it cannot be done by handled by one institute or one company or one country, particularly because we live in an interconnected world. And the problems of the scale and mobility is such that, these waste or materials do not stay at one place. They migrate to each other's territories, and soon it becomes a global problem. We also saw that, with the digital world, we are connected so rapidly. If there are torn jeans worn in New York, probably in the next day, Mumbai girls also start wearing those kinds of things. So if we are interconnected so rapidly with the other world for those matters, then for the awareness of environment and sustainability, we should also be equally aware and equally speedily aware about this. We reminded ourselves that this needs a huge collaborations between industry and academia, and the government. So unless all of us come together, this problem cannot be tackled in itself. And with this, we finally said that research and innovation is not something that what can be done, but it is something what should be done. So it's a call for the need rather than call for the ability. So we need to develop our abilities to handle these problems. And in so doing, not only do we serve our Mother Earth, but we serve our own careers as well. This is by and large what we covered in principle, and we concluded the topic, the series at that time. We covered over seven lectures. Then during the course, there were some questions coming on and off. What is biodegradability, etc. So I had promised at that time that instead of breaking the uh, chain of thoughts, I will take this separately, and that is where today we see ourselves at. So this is the background of why we are discussing today biodegradability and compostability in polymeric materials such as plastics and textiles. What are the origins? What are the myths and the facts? Because a lot of times these things catch the public sentiment, and then they become, very soon they find their way into a belief system and also in the regulatory system. And then it becomes that much more difficult to correct the systems, as a lot of us who are present here from the plastics industry are witnessing and experiencing. So this is an attempt to understand the concepts of biodegradability, biocompostability, particularly in the light of words that are used such as bioplastics, biopolymers, biotextiles. So with this, let me recap some of the concepts. Those of you who have seen this, heard this, might find this repetition, but I want to repeat this nonetheless, because for those who have joined only for this special lecture, they might find this relevant backdrop. So this is what I said about July 1920. Professor Hermann Staudinger enunciated the concept of polymers being long chain molecules of short repeat molecules. And today in this talk, I want to emphasize the concept that these are long molecules linked by covalent bonds. This is very, very important for our discussion today. Earlier, prior to Professor Staudinger's enunciation, the general concept was, why does cellulose behave the way it does and why does glucose behave the way it does, is because they thought that scientists at that time, towards the end of the last century, did realize that these are big molecules, but by big, they did not realize that they could actually be long molecules of repeat units joined together by covalent bonds. They just thought it's a kind of, so one theory said it's an aggregate, somebody said it's colloid. People had hazy ideas that what the bigness came about, but it was Professor Staudinger who clearly enunciated that the linking together of similar bonds. See, what happens is in science, this is a key, the master key. Once you understand what is happening, then suddenly it gives rise to a kind of floodgate of science. That's exactly what happened in the new science, polymer chemistry, which Wallace Hume Carothers opened up a whole new series of polymers, polyesters being one of them. And to remind ourselves, compared to these small molecules such as alcohol, salt, water, etc., the polymer molecules that we are showing here are very, very large molecules. And this is just a model of a polymer molecule. That too, it is short, just what can be fitted on the screen. The actual polymeric molecule would be several screens bigger than this at a molecular level. So molecules are very, very long. And they have the transition temperatures, which we saw in lecture number 2 or 3, thereabouts. And these long molecules, polymeric molecules, poly means many, meron means unit, many units, such as polytechnique or polyclinic, poly means many. These materials, which are composed of long molecules, can manifest themselves, show themselves as either plastics or either synthetic textiles, or coatings or adhesives or cosmetics, or any. These are just 6 main categories. There are several others, but for today's discussions, we are going to kind of switch between plastics and synthetic textiles. And this is a timeline which we saw that how various kinds of polymers came about at various points in time, and that today it's about 8.3 billion tons of plastics have been produced so far. So the kind of scale, and then because plastics are new materials, polymers are new materials, unlike metals where we can distinguish one metal from the other, although they are colored the same, we can recognize bronze from gold. We don't mix them up. That is the kind of intuitive knowledge we have about metals, but that is not the case with plastics. We call chashma plastics, tumbler plastics, pens of plastics, oil pouches plastics. So everything we use the word plastics, but we don't know the names of that. We don't even realize that there are different polymers, different plastics. And therefore, in order to enhance or facilitate the recycling, we reminded ourselves that these are the recycling codes for 6 prominent recycling plastics, recyclable plastics, and all the other thermoplastics are clubbed under the common code number 7. Now it is here that we need to tell ourselves that with this much knowledge about polymers, we now hear a lot about these words such as bio-based polymers or biodegradable polymers. What are these? So we need to understand 3 distinct class of materials. One is the normal synthetic polymers. They are all petro-based, fossil fuel-based materials, petrochemical based. And there is nothing to hide or be ashamed about it. These are made from non-renewable resources. But they are made so because anyway, for our mobility and everything, we will need fuels, and fuels comes from petroleum, and petroleum needs to be refined from crude oil. So from crude oil to petroleum refining is a necessary step, because without fuels, whether you can't have the mobility either in the automotives or the aircrafts or whatever mobility you want, you need fuels. So if you need fuel other than coal, you needed to go to these fossil-based fuels. And in the process of refining came out a lot of 25% material, and in fact, a gainful utilization of these byproducts is the world of plastics and synthetic polymers. So these are normal polymers, and because they are joined by covalent bonds, they are not degradable. Their chemistry, in fact, in the invention of polymers, they were designed so that they become durable, so that they do not get attacked by moth and everything. So those of you who are in textile science would know, for example, suppose if you wear a cotton apparel and go for a jog or something, or sweat it out and put the cotton cloth in a kind of a corner hanger or something, very soon the cotton cloth would start stinking, and in fact it would, in the armpits and on the collars and all, having stains is a very common thing. And this happens because the sweat contains a lot of protein, particularly L-histidine, and that is a good feed for a lot of microbes. And due to their interaction, there is the smell because of a lot of carbon disulfide gets generated, and that's what causes the smell in or perspiration. And then there is a bacterial degradation which causes the staining. Now you will find similar thing happens either in silk or your woolen clothes. All natural polymers are prone to attack by microbes, but none of this happens in synthetic fibers such as polyester, nylon, acrylic, and so forth. So synthetic polymers were designed to be non-biodegradable, because they wouldn't, and which is the reason in the current COVID pandemic, the materials that are helping us protect ourselves, all the PPEs and everything are made of synthetic polymers. Can you imagine the doctors wearing cotton cloths and everything in their operation theaters? No. So synthetic polymers were designed to be durable and non-biodegradable. However, with this new concept of biodegradability, you can indeed add some of the additives and make them biodegradable. We'll come to that shortly. But what do these additives do? They hurt the recycling processes. We will see shortly again these kinds of things. But I'm just parking these thoughts here. Now, in contrast with these synthetic polymers, these are normal synthetic polymers. You now have bio-based polymers. The word here is bio-based. It is different from biopolymers. We need to, at this early stage itself, remind ourselves that bio-based polymers is not the same as biopolymers. Bio-based polymers is where instead of the monomers being petro-based, they are plant-based. That is the biomonomers. For example, in the case of polyethylene terephthalate, the monoethylene glycol, instead of being a petrochemical-based chemical, you can obtain the same MEG from corn. So therefore, it becomes a bio-based material. So at a monomeric level, they are bio-based. However, once they polymerized and they form into a long chain, then that long chain is as durable and non-biodegradable as the synthetic polymers, because once it becomes a polymer, it does not recognize where it was born from. It becomes a polymer and it's the same polymer. Therefore, it is not biodegradable. So simply because a polymer has been made from biomonomers, it does not become biodegradable. So the word bio should not mislead us into believing that everything with the word bio is biodegradable. Now, what are biopolymers? So unlike biomonomers here, biopolymers are directly polymers made by nature. Directly, cellulose is a biopolymer, silk is a biopolymer, starch is a biopolymer, although it is not a fiber forming polymer, but it's a polymer nonetheless. And we will see some other polylactic acid. Nature itself makes that polymer straight away into polymer. Nature does the polymerization reaction in the plants. It doesn't need to do the polymerizations such as here and here in man-made manufacturing sites. The manufacturing happens in the natural plants itself. Therefore, their chemistry is entirely different, and therefore, very often biopolymers are indeed biodegradable, but it is not an automatic concept, and we'll see that later. But by and large, biopolymers are biodegradable. However, before we start jumping with joy, they are not necessarily be recyclable. Recyclability is different from biodegradability. The agency for biodegradation is the microbes. The agency for recyclability is man-made efforts such as inputting of energy and shear forces. We will see this later. At this point, suffice it to say that biopolymers are not the same as bio-based polymers, and biopolymers need not, while they can degrade, they can biodegrade. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are recyclable. In fact, many times they are not recyclable. So here we just tell ourselves that the words biodegrade need to be properly understood before we fall for the marketing tricks. So what has been the process? So here is the main thing, that we have petro-based monomers, which you form polymer resin, here we call it. And during the formation, we have seen the different slides in the previous lectures, how the polymer resin is through converters converted into shaped articles. During this time, you can add normal additives such as colorants, anti-block agent, etc. And then you get the plastics that we use it. Then after the use, the uncollected waste, which becomes the visible litter, depending on the consumer behavior and the administrative efforts, can be segregated into dry waste or wet waste, dry being in the blue bins, plastic being in the blue bins. But those that which gets thrown off as litter is what causes the problem. And so therefore there was anger against plastics. And therefore what people started doing is increasing the efforts to collect the plastics waste. And particularly we saw the pyramid of different plastic materials. So those polymers that were made, plastics that were made from single polymer plastics, could then be recycled or upcycled into new products. But we saw, and we saw that plastics are actually made of complex materials and complex compositions. So therefore, not all plastics got recycled, and several kinds of plastics were continued to be littered, and therefore the anger turned to protests. Then further efforts happened, and even the MLPs, that is multi-layer plastics, whether type 1 or type 2, type 1 being all polymer layers, type 2 MLPs being multi-component, multi-material plastics such as Tetra Paks, which are, all of these have very good barrier properties, which therefore ensure good shelf life, but they are a challenge for recycling. Then how do you deal with that? Is then you subject them to co-processing as either fuels in the kilns or in cement factories, in power plants, to extract energy out of it. Or you subject them to pyrolysis, where you crack the material and go back to monomeric stage. Or you further gasify it. These are all thermochemical treatments done under oxygen deficient conditions, which we saw in the previous lecture. You produce syngas, which is the mother material, and these are called pyrolysis oils. And you can gasify them into syngas, which is the mother of all chemical industry. So therefore, you have a huge amount of recyclability there. And sometimes where none of this is possible, you then repurpose, that is MLPs and all, you repurpose them for using them into roads or making benches or any other lumber out of it. Then came this issue of plant-based, which we just saw. But there the problem is that they block the land and are expensive. So what happened is so therefore the concept came of bans on SUPs, single-use plastics. So the anger turned into protest, turned into bans. So that is, while the plastics did serve huge amount of utility for mankind, they also in the wake generated a lot of negativity. So these recycling techniques were all these techniques that you saw came about. However, the latest one is, instead of normal additives, a concept came of adding special additives so that claims could be made that these plastics are now biodegradable or compostable or any other claims. But what they forget to tell you is that, and this is where we begin our story, is that these things need industrial composting to create a useful material called compost. But they also affect the recycling, which is the mainstay of the used plastics for the majority of the plastics. So while they achieve a certain thing, although in a limited way, but their major disturbance is in the recycling chain that it does for the others. So now as we proceed further, we need to remind ourselves that plastics chain is, like in the textile chain, is not a very straightforward thing. It's a very complex chain. Like in textiles, you have fiber manufacturers, then you have yarn manufacturers, then you have textile spinners, then you have weavers. That's why in many mills you will read the title Rajasthan Spinning and Weaving Mills. That name comes from the fact that, and there are only some mills are only doing spinning mills, some are only weaving mills. So these are complex or very complicated structures of mill design, and then that's where they do blending, they also do processing. Similarly, in the plastics chain, there is a wide array. It's not a monolithic structure. So you have people who are resin manufacturers, converters, producers, brand owners, original equipment manufacturers, recyclers. So there is a whole chain of people involved. And then there are different production processes such as injection molding, thermoforming. We have seen that in the previous lectures. Then each of these plastics are made for different applications such as food, beverages, other applications, and therefore different products are made, different shapes, tubs, cup and pot, tray, jars, clamshells, etc. And then the materials used are also different. Just like in textiles, you have cotton, silk, polyester, viscose. Similarly, in plastics, you can have various polymers as are listed here, and then you will have various regions and size of the companies, which all add to the complexity. The reason we need to know that is all of these huge number of people have, or not all of these people will have the same understanding of what the science behind this is. They are all good producers, but they need not understand or they may not always understand the science behind it, and which is what we'll try to attempt to look at it today. So the word bio has different forms, as distinct definitions as given by UNCTAD, is United Nations, this is Trade and Development Body. And here they clearly say what is degradation, what is biodegradation, what is industrial composting, and what is domestic composting. So here they say it's a chemical degradation through partial or chemical breakdown. And then for biodegradation, the agency here is partial or complete conversion into water, carbon dioxide or methane, plus energy, and a new biomass under the agency of microorganisms such as bacteria or fungi. They will cause the degradation of this. That would process called biodegradation. Now, composting, as slightly different from biodegradation, is the ability to get biodegraded at elevated temperatures under specified conditions and time scales the ones that are found only in industrial composting facilities where standards apply. And domestic composting is what we do with our vegetable stuff and everything. These days, in many housing societies, this is being done. But this domestic composting cannot handle polymeric waste such as textiles and plastics. They need industrial composter only. So what are these materials? Bio sounds so very nice, you know. So this bioplastics we just saw, something is bio-based, something that can be, they can or cannot be, some only a few, such as PLA coming under the brand name Tetra Tech or Flex, can be biodegradable. Compostable is a subset of biodegradability because it does involve the need of microorganisms, but this needs to be handled separately. A new animal that is coming in the way is this called claims of oxo-degradable or oxo-biodegradable. So a lot of these terms come here. So we need to understand what is what. Because there is confusion, sometimes intentional, sometimes out of ignorance. So what are the different species of polymers that fulfill each of these definitions? So if you have this scale here on the x-axis, on this extreme is those polymers that are biodegradable. And on this axis, those polymers that are not biodegradable. The other thing is renewable raw materials. This is not recyclable, and this is renewability. Okay, so these are, or in a way, these are renewability, petrochemical raw materials. Okay, and these are renewable raw materials. Petrochemical raw materials, being fossil waste, are not renewable. So what is the combination of petrochemical based materials and those that are not biodegradable? They are these, that is nearly all conventional plastics such as polyethylene. They are not biodegradable and they are also fossil based. Petrochemical based materials which are biodegradable are biopolymers such as PBAT, okay, polybutylene, and all these things you must have seen, terephthalate, PBS, PCl. These are different kind of materials that are biodegradable. In the renewable raw material based, again, just because they are renewable raw materials doesn't mean they're automatically biodegradable. They can also be non-biodegradable, such as biopolymers, such as those made from, bio-based materials, such as PET, polytrimethylene, terephthalate, and so forth. And the ones that are made from renewable materials and are biodegradable are biopolymers such as polylactic acid, polyhydroxyalkanoic acid, starch blends. These are the kind of things that are. So we need to understand that just a two-dimensional matrix of renewability and biodegradability gives you this complex. If you added a third dimension of recyclability, you will get another kind of picture. And when we look at the regulations that are in place, you will see that there is a separate regulations for handling the material recycling or recovering the material through recycling, and there is another standard which governs the composting and biodegradation. So this actually tells us that recycling and biodegradation are completely different phenomena. Okay, and here is a matrix. So those of you who have attended my earlier talk can revisit this. Is the environmental assessment of materials needs to be done at 3 stages: during their manufacture, during their usage, and the fate after their usage. Each of these stages has different terms that are used, which we need to understand. So during manufacturing, the words that we saw, whether it is natural or renewable sources or non-renewable sources. So usage, then whether there are transportation, there are problems during usage, such as whether they're durable or not. So durability is different, and the fate that happens after the usage, such as recyclability, are they biodegradable? They're two separate things. And during the biodegradation, do they release off gases or chemicals during their decay? So this matrix we have seen, and you can apply this matrix to different alternatives that we have. Metals, glass, these are alternatives that are being proposed for fulfilling the same packaging needs in the case of plastics. And there are plastic containing materials such as Tetra Pak and other things. So if you applied these kinds of norms, whether these materials, whichever you want, what is the kind of negative and positive to each of these under this kind of matrix, you can then build a composite assessment of yourself that from the point of view of environmental friendliness, which material is to be used or which is least harmful. But here, in today's talk, I just want to emphasize that these materials, whether the recyclability, biodegradability, these are the kind of things that are applicable only in the fate of the after usage. Whereas renewable resources is something which is in the manufacturing stage. And therefore, what option to use for that, we need to remind ourselves that there is a hierarchy of waste management in all cities the world over. So there is a dump yard, there is a landfill, there are composting facilities, there are recycling plants, or what are called these and these together, where facilities where the other technologies operate for the valorization of waste. These together are called material recovery facilities, MRFs. In India, most of the times we are at this level, a very, very basic level. We don't even have designated landfills. Forget the fact that we have composting facilities. We need to remind ourselves of this sad reality before we go for the options such as what we have to deal with by claims of biodegradability and everything. So now with this background, we start asking ourselves, what are these biodegradability and compostable plastics? And the same applies to textiles as well. Now, what is expected of these materials? That in the composting environment, these materials should result in the formation of natural byproducts, such as oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, this gaseous material, water, biomass, and inorganic salts. But none of these should leave any persistent or toxic residues. So if there is a process in which some of these things are happening, but if they leave any persistent or toxic, persistent means once they get into the soil, they will not come off easily. So, or in the plants, then the plants get disturbed and their histopathology changes. So those are called persistent or toxic residues. So we expect that the composite, compostable or biodegradable textiles or plastics should do all these things. What is the process for doing all these things? It involves high heat, precisely controlled moisture. Moisture is very important for this because the microbes thrive on these things. And there are several other conditions which isn't available in many parts of the country. Now, what is not available? When you do the testing of composting and everything, the conditions that are used to test the composting or biodegradable materials as used in the laboratories under very clinical and controlled conditions of temperature control, moisture control, then day and night cycles, all of this is not available in reality in many parts of the country. And this is something which we will develop in details subsequently. So therefore, in order to achieve this thing, if these are the processes required, we now need to examine the marketing claims versus the reality. The labels on the products often describe them as compostable, but that doesn't mean that you can just throw the stuff into your backyard compost pile and it will automatically, it will just go and vanish into the air, and then therefore you can carry on, with your life as usual. Because for properly degrading, they have to be sent to commercial compost facilities. So now in countries such as India, where our regular kachra is not lifted regularly and segregated properly by the administrative municipal agencies, just imagine what is going to happen to these compostable materials, which now have an additive inside the plastics or the textile materials. So that gives rise to the huge bifurcation between the expectations and the realities. Now, what is the second impact? These additives are not compatible with the recycling processes. And which is why even in developed countries, if materials that already, they even reject material that is contaminated with food. because the food sparing that is in the residual in the packaging affects the recycling processes. In those countries, they charge you for collecting your refuse, that means your waste, and they want it clean. So in spite of those advanced countries, they reject any material that is a compostable material because that needs to be collected and sent separately because it affects the recycling efforts. Then you can say that what happens to it if the destination is the landfill or the dump yards that we saw earlier. So just throwing into a trash can doesn't mean it is likely to go to a landfill because they degrade only under special conditions. So it will remain in the landfills for a very, very long time. And we discussed the problem about the Ghazipur Hill outside Delhi, how it is kind of risen to a very scary levels of mountainous heights. So it disturbs the chain of the existing waste management, these compostable and biodegradable materials. Now, what is the distinction? So there are regulatory standards separate for biodegradable plastics and separate for compostable plastics. Generally, biodegradation happens under these two conditions under anaerobic condition. So this standard is for anaerobic condition, and the same cousin is for the same anaerobic, but when you want to do an accelerated conditions of landfill conditions. But biodegradation can also be done under aerobic conditions, that is under controlled composting conditions. And so this is something which comes closely with this thing, but it is considered under biodegradable plastics. For compostable plastics, there are the ASTM test methods similar to here. And here the equivalent of ASTM is the European norm standard 13432, which some slides earlier, which we saw here, if you recall. This is the standard which we 13432, which we are now discussing. So it is this 13432. It's a equivalent of this ASTM standard, and whose ISO equivalent is ISO 17088. This is the standard that India has adopted, and only CPET is authorized to test the material as claimed by the supplier. And based on CPET certification, CPCB provides the license to manufacture such products. And although all these agencies are involved, in my personal opinion, this is the wrong way of handling this textile waste because we just saw that they affect the existing recycling chain. So the standards exist, but let us see what are the test conditions in the standards. So if you have these standards, different standards, whether they are for anaerobic biodegradation or aerobic biodegradation or compostable materials. So what are the conditions? So these are the different conditions that have to be used. Now just look at this for the aerobic conditions, both are the same. So 58 plus minus 2. So some temperature needs to be accurately controlled between 56 to 60 degrees Celsius. Now tell me, do we even have this kind of temperature control in any of our landfills, even in a relatively advanced city like Mumbai? Go to Mankur and tell me even if you can, find anywhere in this kind of controlled condition there. Then it needs to be incubated at, in the case of biodegradation, it needs to be incubated at even a stricter temperature in a sealed vessel, digested sludge for 60 days. Now, when you apply these kinds of, and then in the case of compostable, there is a requirement that 90% of the organic carbon should have been converted to carbon dioxide, and that is what they measure to track the extent of composting. So, and this should happen in 180 days. So, when the tests are done under such clinically exacting conditions, then you get a certain result, and that result is used to claim degradability. Now, what are the limitations of such tests and biodegradation? So the ASTM standard is a test method for how to measure it, but it doesn't tell you what a pass or fail criterion is. Okay. For example, the microbes might consume 10% of the bag and container the way the ASTM standard dictates and generate the kind of carbon dioxide that you want to have. But the bag would, a large portion of the bag would still carry back. By bag, I mean the carry bag would still remain, or the textile, whatever you want. So still it will claim that it meets those rules. So therefore, we soon find that the word is misused enough that, okay, my product satisfies this test. Now, this is not the fault of the people who make these additives, because they will go by what is the government has approved, but it is the regulators who need to understand that, these are the kind of things that a pass, how to measure doesn't mean a pass fail test. Okay. Now, even in advanced countries where they are promoting this or they examine these things, they are saying that the new British standard for biodegradable plastics, which was introduced recently, and just this is about a year ago, that it needs to be, the biodegradable products need to be examined by a third party independent organization to see whether it actually meets and actually degrades in the facility. Because one thing is to measure it in a clinically controlled laboratory, and the other is to kind of see what actually happens in the actual dump yards or landfills. Because please understand, the biota, the microbes that exist in a certain landfill will not be identical across. For example, what the microorganisms available in the Ghazipur landfill or dump yard will not be the same as in Mankur, which will not be the same as done in the CPET laboratory. So while the CPET laboratory will say that it is degrading or it is generating 90% or whatever carbon dioxide, it might actually in the actual landfill conditions, it's not going to achieve that. Okay. And then we can all tell ourselves, will we have enough independent agencies to do this actual studies? So therefore, here is a list of what biodegradable plastics will actually hurt. They will hurt the existing recycling chain, which is there for normal plastics in India. The normal plastics have reached 60% recycling. The moment you have this flux of biodegradable or compostable additives, they are going to hurt that recycling chain, and the recycling figure, which India boasts of as a good figure, it's going to go down very soon. The other thing is, how do you identify or differentiate the normal plastic from biodegradable plastic? There is no way to identify, because most of these biodegradable additives belong to the similar class. For example, in the case of polyester, they will have something polyester-based material, but of course polyester, not polyethylene terephthalate, but probably polyalkylene terephthalate. So the IRs and everything are going to pick up the same ester groups. How are you going to differentiate one from the other? Then there are extra cost of additives. It takes 6 months to biodegrade. Now, what happens during the 6 months? On day one, there is let's say 100 tons of plastic waste that is piled up. Day two, there is another 100 tons. Day three, there is 100 tons. So on the 179th day, so 179 into 100 tons would be kind of piling up in the and only on the 108 days, something on day that has come in on day one would have kind of receded. But for all practical purposes, the visitors or the citizens are going to experience the same mountain of garbage anyway. For them, the visible signs are not going to happen. The claims will be made that on the 180th day, the material of day one has reduced. The material of the waste pile on day two would have reduced slightly less, and like so forth. So this is going to be, unless we stop the kind of waste that is coming in, this is going to keep on accumulating day after day after day after day. So even if it is actually biodegrading, your visible litter effects is not going to go down. That is because, and worse is, certifying conditions in the certifying labs are not the same as in the real environment. So who would know whether they're fully biodegrading in the real environment? And lastly, this is the topic of microplastics or microfibers that we are so concerned about. We are not even aware of what they are going to do, these additives, which is why advanced countries in states such as California, under this California Proposition 65, they have prohibited the sale of biodegradable plastics or claims such as biodegradable or compostable. Similar things apply to compostable plastics, and then we don't even know that, or we need to remind ourselves that they would need separate collection from normal plastics. At least these biodegradable plastics can be mixed with the common plastics, but compostable plastics necessarily need separate composting facilities. And in order to operate the composting facilities, that much land will be blocked, because you need dedicated sites to do the composting. On the one hand, we are talking of land problem, and then after several decades of that thing, there is a question that land becomes totally eutrophied and it becomes the land's fertility is lost. So these are the problems which never get stated. So therefore, we need to remind ourselves that these are good words to understand. But in summary, we need to understand that what exactly is happening. Every crisis brings in an opportunity for newer ideas. Nothing wrong in that thing, because there was World War I. There came this the invention of plastics, because in World War I, more people died in the war in the cold Siberian weather, because the uniforms, the clothing of the uniforms of soldiers would, because of moth bites and everything, got kind of punctured, and many people, soldiers, died because of frostbite and not so much out of bullets. So a need was felt to create synthetic fibers, which is why we had nylon, acrylics, and later polyester. So and this is true for all wars. Wars are the biggest generators of new technology and advancements. So similarly, if the present war on pollution is a good generator, there is no harm in that thing. But with advancement of science and mature understanding of the situation, we should understand if there are 5 remedies that are coming, we need to use our independent mind and scientific thinking to assess which of the remedies is a wholly sustainable remedy. And similarly, biodegradable plastics and additives are getting promoted and pushed for endorsements and approvals. However, the science of biodegradation and the technology of plastics manufacture and the disposal practices as they exist in real India will only increase the formation of difficult to spot microplastics. And then you will have reports which say that plastics have entered into our food chain and everything. But it is we and our regulators who allow these kinds of biodegradable composting plastics and everything who will have to be blamed for this. These materials will destroy the existing recycling chain, and the recycling efficiencies that we have achieved so far will be dented severely. Then there are the chances of the leaching of these contents into the packaging, because we don't know, not enough studies have been done which are reliably done to examine what happens to by the incorporation of these additives, what happens to the leaching of otherwise materials that would not leach out of plastics. And generally, just because a material is biodegradable, it is not going to improve the disposal habits of consumers. They're not going to say, okay, now this plastic bag or this bottle is now biodegradable, so I shall not litter. The habit of my littering is going to continue. So this is going to give a false illusion of an easy remedy. And therefore, from the points of view of ecology, economy, food safety, and human health, these products, that is, these additives, are, in my opinion, harmful, because they will only shift the consequences, not eliminate them. The concerns on visible litter will remain unmitigated, because the disposal habits will continue to be there. Therefore, we need to look at these claims with extra caution. We now move to the topic of bioplastics. That means those plastics or biopolymers that are made by nature itself. So the only fact is bioplastics are not made from oil, but that's the only benefit that it has, because bioplastics, from converting from biopolymers, the word is bioplastics, please understand. Biopolymers need to be converted to bioplastics. That means they have to undergo a shape forming process. So whatever toxicity is claimed for plastics, the same would apply to bioplastics. And they will also equally trigger strong toxic reactions under laboratory conditions. And these claims were found after examining thousands of chemicals in a largest survey to date of chemicals from plant-based materials, wherein they examined 43 different types of plastic products: disposable cutlery, chocolate packaging, wrap paper, drink bottles, etc. 80% of these products contain thousands of different chemicals, and some of them some of the items had more than 20,000 chemicals. Now, this is what happens when you talk about materials, because bio-based materials, in addition to the shape forming processes which involve some of the anti-block, anti-slip agents, etc., they also need to be sanitized. And the chemicals used for sanitizing this before they come to us would contain a lot of these residual chemicals. And even similar products will have their own special composition. For example, a plastic bag and a wine cork, which is made from the same biopolyethylene, can have completely different substances. So not only are there numerous chemicals, but completely different chemicals. And this is something which we need to worry when we are also advocating the use of recycled materials for food grade application, although that is not the topic of the day. And this is just about a year ago paper. So all that we are seeing is the latest research that we are seeing this. Okay. So presence of toxic chemicals in the alternatives also cannot be ruled out. So this is a Hubbu matrix that we saw in one of the earlier lectures. That is not to say that we shouldn't examine any alternatives, but before we start, rejoicing, we need to apply this matrix to see whether that's going to be a viable alternative. So first thing is we need to examine if it's a functionally equivalent, whether it gives the same functionality for the purpose with which you are displacing the original material. We need to see whether it is cost effective, whether it's economically viable. We need to see if it's environmentally benign, whether it has a lesser eco-footprint, whether it is recyclable. This thing needs to be understood. We need to see whether it is safe, whether it has any residual chemicals, as we see in bioproducts, which we'll see in the next two slides quickly. And the next is whether they're scalable. That means whether they're available adequately at all places at all times, and not just for filing your entry in a competition organized by the government to get a certificate. Whether they would continuously be available at all times in all places in adequate quantities, and whether it will be practically feasible. So we need to assess these alternatives on the basis of this Hubbu matrix. You can have your own matrix, but this has come after a great deal of thought. And now with this matrix in mind, just examine some of the bio-based packaging that is kind of getting sometimes coming off on the screens, getting publicized and probably getting accolades. So this is an example of a banana, masks. The brown underline is for the object, the green is for the source. So using banana tree, whether masks can be made of this kind. And again, we are talking of July 2020. So all of these are latest examples that I'm giving. Or using of banana leaf. Here it is banana tree masks, the bark, and here it's banana leaf. India is not new to some of these things, but not in this form. Okay. And the alternatives can be good for such time depending on the application. And some of these things which we were kind of traditionally using for this thing are now coming from Germans, and we are clapping as if it is new to us. So we gave up our own traditions only to find that the same traditions are coming back by claiming that Germans have kind of made this. But this Patravadi and everything we have used it. Drone and Patravadi we have been used for a long time, and for some purposes these are definitely useful and correct, and there is no harm in using that thing. But you need to apply the Hubbu matrix and see whether these can be scalable, whether they will be safe for mass uses, where whether you don't have cleaning mechanisms of these things. So whereas you might probably be safe in terms of avoiding any other even if they don't have any other kind of muck or soil or anything. But in the process of sanitization and transporting from one place to another place, if there is kind of preservatives or sanitizers sprayed on it, those will remain as residues. So we need to look at these materials, but this is an example of how materials are coming in the market. As we move towards our conclusion, we need to fundamentally design our packaging such that there is a spelling mistake here. But Jenna Jambek, who is the professor, who I keep saying that she is a professor at University of Georgia, whose seminal work, a simple work such as measuring the kind of plastics that have been produced so far, the figure of 8.3 billion tons, which I showed in that graph, came from her work. And it is this that I would request Textiles Department of ICT and other places to embark on these kinds of studies where we do our own measurements. So along with our chemistry-based research and teaching programs, we should also get into the public measurement field, which is, as I told in my talks, that data is the new oil. What the significance of oil that was there in the past decades is the same for data in the current times, which is why you have so many courses now coming up in data, big data and data management. Anyway, we need to think about the end of life when designing things, whether it is textiles or plastics. If you're making a fanciful garment, or a carpet or a mattress or any material, what will its fate be at the end of its life? Will it be pickable? Will it be retrievable? Will it be recyclable? So unless we incorporate this design thought thinking in our at the designing stage itself, unless we include the recyclability or sustainability parameters during the design stage, we are going to end up with becoming irresponsible academicians or researchers, and or not, if not irresponsible, at least mute spectators, as mute as probably common citizens are. So we must apply the end of life principle. EOL is the end of life principle, right from the conception of materials. Before I come to a conclusion, since microplastics is kind of talk of the town, microfibers or microplastics, just one slide before we end. We spoke a lot about biodegradable, biocompostable, bio-based biopolymers so far. One of the fears is the formation of microplastics or microfibers. So what are these? I'll focus on plastics because that is something which is coming, which is any material article which is less than 5 millimeters in the disintegration process is called a microplastics. Microplastics can be of primary microplastic or secondary microplastic. Primary microplastics is those small plastic particles that are intentionally added. As in cosmetics, and those polymeric beads are there, microbeads. Those are banned now all over. But the small particles that get formed after they're used as a disintegration process is the secondary microplastics, which is the cause of the concern. So this happens when the plastics resides in the landfills or oceans or in washing machines, plastic textiles, for example. But these things have been happening for as long back as plastics and textiles have been littered. I mean, it's not that just because it's being discussed today, it doesn't mean that they didn't happen in 1941 when polyester fibers or 1950 when polyester fibers were made. If polyester fibers and plastics that were made in the 1970s and 80s, so since that time they have been littered, and therefore the formation of microplastics or microfibers has been happening. But it's been recently gathered the moment steam and reportedly, but not much is known about that. In the meantime, WHO has advised that there is no cause for alarms and that more studies are needed. And the studies are happening as we speak. This is another area where textile and polymer science departments should undertake a study on the formation of microfibers and microplastics. Because a lot of analytical protocols need to be standardized, toxicological effects need to be studied. But until now, no epidemiological or histopathological evidence of any harm in any population has been found out. These are big words. What does epidemiology mean? Epidemiology means a study that is done over large populations, over large geographies, over large periods of time. Only then you can make, for example, cigarette is injurious, smoking is injurious to health. To arrive at this conclusion, a lot of epidemiological studies had to be done. And then it was found that it is a common statement that can be made. Histopathological evidence means what? When we find some evidence of these toxic materials in the tissue cells. So those kinds of evidences have not been found in the case of microplastics. That is not to say that this is a tolerable thing. Any foreign body in any foreign particle in the body is to be unwelcome. But the quantum is grossly exaggerated. And WhatsApp, you will have, we kind of have microplastics as big as a credit card, that we are eating per week. A credit card is typically 5 grams a week. Okay. So which means about in a 40-year-old person, at the rate of 5 grams per week, 52 weeks per year, and if you take about 30 years or thereabouts, in a man's life, he has been kind of in interaction with plastics. So imagine that it would mean about 5 kilos of plastics are there in a 40-year-old person. Is this even true? So a lot of times we need to look at these WhatsApp messages that you have one credit card worth of plastics being in it. So these are some kind of sensationalizing statements. In a way, they are good because they draw the attention, but you cannot latch on to the actual numbers. Similarly, there is a number. Plastics do not degrade for 450 years. How did anybody come at this number 450 years? Now, because plastics just got invented about 70, 80 years ago. So where did this 450 years of figure comes out? But you'll find this, being tossed around even in, a lot of conferences and government reports and everything. So nobody asks a simple question, bhaiya ye figure kahan se laya tumne? Okay, but microparticles or particles are generated from all materials. It's not just that plastics and textiles are the culprits. They happen from wooden materials, from metals, for example, when you're hammering things, from tires, from ceramics, from marbles. Just now, as we speak, next door to my flat is a lot of renovation work that's going on and on for the past 3 weeks. And the amount of dust and everything that gets formed. So particles have been there. Yes, yesterday there was a report published about air quality index in North India and entire India statewide distribution published by researchers in the University of Chicago. And the air pollution levels are in India are 8 times more than the WHO limits. That is air pollution for you, and that is happening due to particulate matter of 2.5 microns. Those are also particulate matter. But we are not talking about any of these things, or not talking as intensely as we talk about microfibers. This is only to put things in perspective. This is not to condone any of these things. In summary, as a summary to bring this to a conclusion, the biodegradable plastics need a myth buster, as if they are bioplastics will eliminate and solve all disposal issues. So this is a slide which just summarizes everything that I've said, that there is no evidence that bioplastics can biodegrade in the darkness and confinement of a landfill. And biodegradability introduced by the incorporation of additives in the normal plastics are even more harmful because they will hurt the recycling chain. So with this, I leave you with this smartness that a lot of us are smart people, but like in the using the COVID language, most of our smartness is asymptomatic. We need to become symptomatic in our smartness, in our good choices and decisions and narratives that we choose to believe in. With this, I would like to conclude my talk, not before reminding you that our polymeric materials are, these many kind of stalwarts have contributed to the advancement of science, right from plastics used as hip joints to spacecrafts to implants. Plastics and polymers have been serving mankind so well. And ever since its history in the Nobel Prize, in the 105 years of its history, we are finding that 101 years or 121 years of its history, we are finding 7 Nobel Prizes given in the field of polymer science. Professor Staudinger, whom I have mentioned a lot, and then Ziegler Natta and Paul John Flory, and a lot of these people who have enriched the polymer science that we enjoy today in the fields that I just mentioned. Of this, Professor Grubbs has visited the ICT, and he's actually an honorary doctorate has been given by ICT to him. He's still alive. All the people in the brown, mercifully, are still alive and amidst us. And the reason I bring about this is because the Nobel Prize announcements for 2021 is going to happen next week. Just in fact, a week from now. And it has a very disciplined schedule of Nobel Prizes. The first Monday of October always is for physiology or medicine. The following day, this is a Nobel week, beginning the first Monday of every October. We remember Valentine's Day, but as scientists and people of science, these are the dates we should be remembering the most. This should be an aspirational quotient for all our students and researchers. And very soon, in about a week's time, exactly from a week from now, we should look with bated breath whether we have any physics or chemistry prize dedicated coming our way of polymer science. At least that is my interest every year. With this, I would request that today I've been invited at NDTV at 6:30 today. If interested, please join.